we met Bruce, I think it was probably over a year or so back, and he told us about a company he'd founded in South Africa to improve HIV testing. We wanted to help, and we're very, very excited about the things he's been able to do. So I'm really looking forward to hearing about that today.
Thank you, Claire, for this wonderful opportunity, and thank you for all the help and services and software that you've provided. It's made a real difference in our business, and I'd like to demonstrate today kind of how you have managed to help us. So, and I would encourage people to ask questions as we go through this, mostly because I get tired of hearing my own voice. So if you have questions, by all means, please do ask in the chat panel. So I thought what we would do, afternoon for me, maybe morning for you guys, I'm calling from South Africa, is give you a little bit of background about who Shout It Now is, and then attempt to show you a video. I'm chatting with you from South Africa, and sometimes the quality of the connection's not always great, but I'm optimistic for this afternoon. So we're going to show you what we do without having to necessarily take you out into the fields in some of the poorer areas of South Africa where we work. And then I'm going to talk about the problems we've solved using SIMUL8. And then, as I mentioned earlier, by all means, do please ask questions. So without further ado, let's get started with this. So as background, as you can probably tell by my accent, I am not a native South African. I spent most of my career doing technology startup companies in Silicon Valley. In fact, I did 6 of them in 27 years, and then was fortunate enough to be able to retire. And in that process of retirement, one fateful day at the gym, I started reading about HIV in South Africa and couldn't believe it. And I'll share with you some of the statistics here in a second about how really challenging the problems are around HIV. But at that time, if you were 15 years old, there was a 50% chance that you were going to die from HIV. Just to put that into perspective, a 1 in 2 chance that if you were 15 years old living in South Africa, that you would die from HIV. HIV, as I'll talk about in a second, is the worst epidemic the world has seen since the plague hit Europe. So that was a little bit of the background, and I was fortunate, knowing nothing about South Africa, to be able to meet some wonderful people along the way and get some great support to start Shout It Now. And we did that in 2007, and we are kind of an interesting mix of technologists as well as marketing people and social scientists. And our approach is a little different than traditional nonprofits. We have focused on using celebrities because, as I'll talk about in a second, most of the epidemic focuses on young people, and specifically young women. And for those of you that have children, you know that your kids listen to celebrities such as sports stars and movie stars more often than they will listen to their parents and older people like me with gray hair. So we use celebrities. We use technology because it's actually inexpensive and scalable and provides us with a tremendous amount of data. And then what we do is we used incentives in the beginning until we were told that we couldn't use incentives any longer. And again, what we look at is business practices that we can bring to the nonprofit world. So our primary focus has been around education and HIV testing. So to that end, we've been successful in our testing campaign to have educated now in excess of 413,000 people. Last year, we were down to 2 teams. Each of those teams educated and tested 28,000 people per year at a cost of around $12 US, all in inclusive. With some of the help from SIMUL8, we were also able to change our processes so that we're now taking those 14 people and not having them educate and test 28,000 people, but in fact having them educate and test 43,000 people per year. And it's not enough just to educate and test people. To say, gee, I'm sorry you're HIV positive, have a good day, doesn't suffice. So 90% of our clients get linked into care through our call center. Originally, for those of you in the business world, we use Salesforce.com as a way of motivating and tracking our clients into care, because it actually is a sale to get people to go to the clinic. Because of the stigma associated with being HIV positive, people don't want to go to the clinic. So we collect enough data to actually motivate people to go there via our call center. We also have been using biometrics, and I wish I could say it was brilliant strategic planning on our part that we had planned on doing this from the beginning. It wasn't. The real challenge is that people don't want to use their real names when they test, and not everyone has ID books, and names change over time. So biometrics enables us to have a great way of tracking our clients through this process. We've been fortunate enough to receive funding from the U.S. government and PEPFAR. George Bush, the former president, did, at least in my opinion, one thing right, and put $50 billion US into HIV care, and we've been fortunate to receive a little bit of that money. So when we started, our initial focus was on working with students in classrooms, and to that end, we had educated and tested in excess of 46,000 students. 98.5% of all students who went through our program went for an HIV test, picked up their results, and it worked great. And then we were thrown out of schools by the government, who felt that it was unethical to tell 16-year-olds they were HIV positive. And unfortunately, our funders did what the South African government requested and asked us to stop doing that. So we moved to community-based testing, very similar to what we do in schools, and I'll show you that in a second. From that, we then added primary health screening, because dealing with HIV and tuberculosis, which is our primary focus, isn't good enough when you look at the stats, because the reality is that diabetes is ultimately going to kill more people than HIV will. That's because the medication for HIV has become so good. And as time is going on, we see that the funding is going away, so that we're moving towards a for-profit model, a social enterprise, which I'll talk about just briefly if we have time towards the end. So that's a little bit of the background and history on who we are and how we got here. For those of you not familiar with South Africa, it is the hub, it is the epicenter of the HIV epidemic. 6.8 million people are living with HIV out of a population of 53 million people now. 19% of adults are HIV positive. 400,000 new infections are happening every year. And unfortunately, those new infections are happening with young people, especially young women. The ages of 15 to 24, kind of the foundation for future growth in South Africa, are the ones who are being hit hardest by the HIV epidemic. The South Africa, the leading provider is that 2.5 million people that accounts for is completely provide who need them. What's going to happen in the near future is that anyone who is diagnosed as HIV positive should, according to the World Health Organization, immediately go on antiretrovirals, and that is going to take a very bad situation and make it worse. So those are some of the challenges that are being faced by South Africa right now, and part of the reason that Shout It Now actually exists. Again, if people have questions, please use the question bar along the way. So how do we do this? We believe that if people won't go to the clinics, we need to actually go to the people. So we have mobile labs that I'll show you in a second that we take into some of the poorest communities in the world. We set up tents, servers, and what we do is we register each person using their fingerprint. We then give them a choice of information that is relevant to them. It's short, it's sweet, and it's very similar to MTV videos. And there's a reason our focus is on youth. As I mentioned earlier, most of the new infections are happening with young people. So as a result, we want to position ourselves as being youth-friendly. So it's a bit like watching MTV. Then what we do is we actually provide people with, we ask questions of people about not just who they are, but also their sexual history, because we know that nobody wants to sit in front of a complete stranger and talk about their risks and sexual past. So we ask the questions to people online with multiple languages translated so that the questions are actually read to you and it's point and click along the way. So we collect great information that people wouldn't otherwise share. At that point, our clients then walk into a tent, meet with one of our counselors, they put down their fingerprint, their risk profile shows up, our counselors put down their fingerprint so we know which counselor sees which client for how long. And the first question we ask is, do you mind if we record this conversation for quality and training purposes? What that enables us to do is to do quality audits on all of our staff members to make sure that they're delivering the messages with the right empathy and customer service that we have trained them for. So we actually audit that. The client is then tested for HIV. If it turns out that they are HIV positive, we support them at that point and then turn them over to our call center. All of the data gets uploaded from the field to our data center so that people operating in the call center are able to then reach out to our clients and have the data at their hands, which enables them to connect with our clients and eventually get them into care. And that takes, as I said earlier, about 90% of our clients make it into care, but that can take up to 45 days. And then we continue to follow up with our clients until we know that they're safely in the clinic's hands, and that's our point of deembarkation. So with that, what I'm going to do is actually turn the controls over to William Taylor. William is our head of operations, and he's going to play for you a short 3-minute video about what life looks like in the field for us in South Africa. So William, I am making you the presenter.
Welcome to Shout It Now. What if someone applied customer-centric thinking, e-learning technology, and business efficiency to healthcare screening? Basic medical tests could come to where you are, teach you about your health in a language you can understand, and incentivize you to take care of yourself. Yo, what up? This is Slicker.com. You in the Shout It Now house right about now. We're at Pretoria, Semi-Mark Square, and I want to walk you through the Shout It Now process. So follow me, join me, and let me show you how it's done.
When you get registered, we use your fingerprint for storage of data, one. Secondly, for confidentiality purposes. And thirdly, for identity. We actually register you through a fingerprint. We would take a few details about you.
So who do you live with, Karen? Do you have a car? Your contact numbers? Date of birth?
So confidential, but I'll tell you.
We proceed to the wait.
After registration, you would go through to watch a video. A video would have some information on HIV/AIDS, which actually takes care of the part where we say we educate you.
So we're at the second step of the Shout It Now process. I got Mercedes on my side. I got my barcode from Vincent. I'm about to do a little quiz that's going to ask me certain things. Oh man, that was dope. Celebrity meets technology, meets personal e-learning. This is easier than sitting there in front of someone asking you questions about your sexual life. It's one thing to come in all bubbly. It's another thing to work out with the results. My right hand.
This is authentication. This is me accessing your profile, the one that you registered for in the registration.
When you get to the tent, the counselor would actually ask you questions like smoking, drinking, and stuff like that. Those questions would actually help the counselor to identify the problems that might actually put you at risk. And as such, the counselor would actually be able to help you minimize those.
Yeah. Do you exercise, walk, run, play sports?
Then after that, we would actually ask you for your consent, whether you'd like to get tested or not.
Your results will have one line if they're negative. They'll have 2 or 3 lines if they're positive.
Oh, you really testing me? Barcode label on my test, so the results can't be read too late or too early. Nice one, shout it now.
After that, then you go through the test and then you go to the waiting area again to wait for your results.
So we out here, I just stepped out of the tent, and whatever the results are, it never means that it's the end anyway, you know. It just means that you gotta be more cautious.
The world you understand, sin. I know it continue and the struggle continue, sin. Well, the sing side. Can't give up the fight. Get on you, revolution of his spread.
I'm done. Walked you through the Shout It Now process. The team, the crew, the staff is helpful, friendly. They try to get you what you need to get. And not to mention that, like, it's progressive with the technology. So what I advise is that Team Shout It Now needs to go across the country, across the world if you have to, because you're doing a disservice. Everybody needs to be able to test like this, and we need to be able to deal with such competent staff who are willing to help us. Let's get it. I want to see it in my city. In fact, I want to see it outside my house. I want to see a Shout It Out Now tent outside my house. Not that I need to test every day, but just so I can come there once a year. Peace out.
You are the first target. Step on them list. That's why in the gate you have a big up on your fist.
Okay, thank you, William, for doing that. So I hope the quality of the audio was adequate, kind of beaming across out to the GoToMeeting site and back. Sometimes shows delays on my side, but hopefully it at least gave you a flavor of what we are trying to do. So let me spend just a minute now and chat a little bit about the problems and why we used SIMUL8. So originally our plan, as I mentioned, was that we worked in schools because we believed that we could influence the behavior of children. And when you work in schools, it's actually a fairly organized process because you work with grades. One grade comes in, you register them, you educate them, you test them, then you send them back to class and you take the next class. So it was actually fairly easy to do, and we were able to, with a fair amount of work, make spreadsheets work for us. But to say it was easy was not the case. Spreadsheets, in fact, were difficult, and I can remember being in my office one evening at around 11 o'clock thinking there had to be an easier way. When we got so unceremoniously thrown out of schools by the Minister of Education, we then moved into community-based service testing like you saw in the video. And at that point, Excel spreadsheets actually did not work for us at all. I can remember trying and thinking, this is never going to enable us to plan the way we need to and to find the adequate resources. And at that point, it was relatively simple. We had 12 different steps and functions. Since that time, it's grown a lot. And what we realized that because we work with people and we talk a lot about processes along the way, but at the end of the day, it's all about the quality of the services that we provide. So no client gets rushed from the tent, and we make sure that we spend the right amount of time with each client, especially the ones that are diagnosed as positive. We have identified probably close to 40,000 people who are HIV positive, and that sounds like a big number, but at the end of the day, it comes down to the care and treatment that you're giving each individual person, because they are just that. They are people. So the times varied, the skills of our staff varied, and what we wanted to do was make sure that we had a process in place, because our approach is a little different than most NGOs. We wanted to be like McDonald's. We wanted the same level and processes of service regardless of which team you were visiting. So with that, then, we had to come up with a way to plan and be able to execute our services to become scalable. And when we talked about becoming the McDonald's of the HIV world, everyone said it wasn't possible. So what do you do when faced with a problem that you don't know how to handle? You go out and you find consultants. And I was fortunate enough to have an operations research class or two in my MBA program and realized that I didn't have nearly the skills to do this. And I felt like there had to be better tools out there. And so when the going gets tough, the tough go find consultants. And that's what we did at the University of Cape Town. And we identified the operations research department, showed up on their doorstep, and begged and pleaded for help. And what makes consultants so effective is not only that they know what they're doing, but you can also watch and learn what they're doing. And they had some great tools. And specifically, the tool they had was SIMUL8. So we kind of watched over their shoulder as they did this and realized that, you know, we need to be able to do this. And so we learned from the consultants. We brought not only their processes, but also looked and found which tools they were using. And that led us to SIMUL8. And that's what we've been using. And we were fortunate enough to connect with the marketing department and the technical folks at SIMUL8 who were kind enough to help us with licensing. And what we did is we took the license and we just, as we say, modeled the hell out of what we're doing. And our approach is very much try it, fail, fix it. And with SIMUL8, what that does is actually increase the rate at which we can iterate. And it is amazing to me, even still, how we are able to model our activities, find out where the problems are long before we're actually in the field with live customers in front of us. So what we've continued to do is iterate on the business based upon our theories and ideas using the tools at SIMUL8 with SIMUL8 and be able to then revise what our models look like based upon the actual results that we're experiencing in the field. And our process is continue to iterate, 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 get faster and better at what we are doing with this. So to that end, what we have done is 4 different major revisions to our business processes. And what we found with SIMUL8 is that it's extraordinarily fast. It is remarkably accurate. What we find we're able to model on screen is almost identical to what our experience is in the field. The power of the tools makes it such that we are plus minus 3% in terms of variance. The one thing that we haven't been able to model, and Claire, if you've got ideas for this, is actually the weather, which we find is probably the biggest single challenge that we now have in the field. So with that, what we do is we model our ideas and get them to be part of our business processes. And I have to say that the kind people at SIMUL8 actually took the time to understand our business. And I don't know if Fiona's on the line or not, but she was a remarkable consultant, incredibly patient with us. And what we did was use the expertise to help model some of the more challenging aspects of our business using the incredible skills of the SIMUL8 consultants. And then what we do is we take the models and we tweak them ourselves and continue to change and modify them. So what we're able to do is co-create together our business practices using the software, using the expertise, and then a lot of do-it-yourself. And it has been incredibly successful in our deployment of new services into the field. So what I'd like to do is just show you quickly kind of what some of the requirements are in our business. And we use the term business even though we're a nonprofit. To that end, what we do is we focus on recruiting. Our marketing budget is exactly 0. So we do guerrilla marketing in the streets. We train our staff how to walk up to complete strangers and talk them into going for an HIV test. We then register everyone at the lab with their fingerprint. We then have them go through a computer online program where we ask them questions. The next step in this process is pre-counseling. We then have someone who actually reads the test results real time. If they are HIV negative, it's an easier way to counsel people. It's faster. but last quarter 13% of our clients were HIV positive. And handling people who are HIV positive is a delicate process and life-changing for our clients. So that process of counseling people is built into our models. We run confirmatory tests because we never trust one test. We run multiple tests. We do something called a CD4 test to find out at what stage they are with their disease. We then, as I mentioned, upload all of this information to the call center, who does an immediate call and then continues to do follow-up calls until we actually get people linked into care. So what I'd like to do at this point is turn the presentation back to William, who can actually run one of these models. And I don't know how effective it's going to be showing this over a webinar, but I thought you might find it interesting. And again, Fiona, if you're online, I'm sorry about this. We did not make it pretty. We know that you guys can. For us, it's just down and dirty. So it's not kind of the beautiful presentation that I know SIMUL8's possible with. So with that, I'm going to turn the presentation back over to William and have him run the simulation.
Hi. Yeah, basically, if you look, Bruce spoke about all the processes, but within the processes, we've also got the tests that we use have different time frames. So we always got to take that into account. So when we have a change that we get different tests from the government now, we need to take that into account, see how that affects our process. So with SIMUL8 made it much easier because we could actually just change our settings for the timing on that, and it would tell us what difference it would make, where we might need to move staff around or change something in our process to make it work a lot better. So we've included the whole recruitment, registration, the testing, when we enter the results, if they put negative, what happens to them there, the on-site negative details, and then the positive, including at the bottom the whole call center. And the call center is over, if you run it, it's actually over a few days because we've got to take in, we normally call them within like 48 hours, and then we do a follow-up call to make sure they are linked to care, and that could go on for another week or two, depending how long it is. It could go up to 45 days normally. So, but for our purposes, we just did the first follow-up call to actually simulate that, because obviously looking how many follow-up calls we got compared to how many new people coming in, we had to work out how many call center staff we had, and this helped us ideally to calculate that. And if I run it, what you will see is there is certain queues, and you see how they fill up, and that was very useful to us because the first time the way we had it set up, those were actually overflowing. So with the changes that SIMUL8 helped us do, we were able to then actually modify things. We still see some details coming through there, some queues, but not like as much as we were previously. And it gave us made us able to actually expand and be able to get a lot more people through, and we keep improving it. We also, with Fiona, which I wasn't aware of, where we could actually pool the testers and readers into a group because they do move around. So they'll be testing now, but maybe just now there isn't many people to test, and they'll do recruiting, or they'll do counseling, whatever. So we had to be able to move staff around, and the way we did it is because we do have some that specialize in recruiting and work only in that area mainly. We had to be able to move them around in that, but make sure that we got the staff and that, and take into account lunches and all those sort of details. So as you can see, it does run for quite a while, but it has helped us improve drastically. I mean, as Bruce said, we've nearly doubled the amount of people we test now, and we actually seen a lot higher positive, and we, for the first time last quarter, hit 90% were linked to care in the call center, which is an amazing feat, I think, in that normally that's not that high. So it was great, and that a lot of it comes down to what we were able to pick up from SIMUL8 and change some of our processes to make it better and employ staff accordingly.
Thank you for that, William. I'm watching this on the screen, and what we are running was for a full 2 weeks, as I recall, so that we could actually see the effect on the call center and how people worked through the system. And it's been a godsend for helping us figure out resource allocations, because our two key focuses are on quantity and quality. So we need to make sure that queues aren't too long, but that we're using our resources wisely as a nonprofit to be able to test as many people as we can. So that's, in summary, what we have done with this. I think I've got 2 more slides to present, and then I'm hoping that there are questions through this process. So, kind of in conclusion, what we have done is SIMUL8 is now part of our business process. We talk about modeling things long before we implement them, and it is a part of our standard operating processes whenever we're considering new services and new areas to go into. And it does 2 things for us as well. It increases our confidence when we kind of bring technology into some of the poorest areas. There are a lot of skeptics about, will this work? And when we talk about being a McDonald's-like organization in terms of volume and scale, we can present with confidence knowing that the simulation exercises actually have been validated in the past. So when we talk to funders and government officials, it provides a lot of credibility and confidence. And in fact, I have been asked to speak at a Department of Health Innovations conference next week, and this will be one of the things that I'm demonstrating about how we use technology to be scalable and to provide high-quality, low-cost services. So with that, for us then, the future was that we moved into community-based testing. And last year, our average target was 150 clients per team per day. And what we are doing this year is we're changing our processes. So we spent a lot of time with SIMUL8 trying to look at what we're doing and reorganize the processes that we have. And our targets are moving from 150 clients per day per team to 225 to a scale of range of 300. And we know that this is possible because we're able to model it that way. So we just released this new version of our service 2.5 weeks ago. And just looking at the data yesterday, we're averaging 254 clients. And if you'd asked me if this was possible before, I would have said no. But because we can model it using SIMUL8, I was actually fairly confident it would work, and that's what we've done. So we're still in the early stages here, but if we can control for weather, and I'm hoping you guys can find a solution for that, I'm very, very confident that we're going to be able to significantly enhance the number of people we test this year. And the next thing that we're considering is in 2016 is actually creating a social enterprise to provide medication. And again, we'll be using SIMUL8 in this because it now becomes a lot more complicated around having the right staff, right supplies, right follow-up with our clients, not just now providing them with a diagnosis, but also providing them with the medications that they're not getting in the clinics. So with that, I am going to turn it over to questions from people who are out there.
Bruce, thank you so much. That was fantastic, and it's just such a delight to us to hear the difference that you've made using our software. It's a thing that sort of keeps us motivated as we're moving forward with developing it. So thank you very much indeed. We've got a few questions for you, so I'm just going to read them out and then hand them over to you to answer, if that's okay.
All right.
Yeah, so the first question is there a link between SIMUL8 and Excel to show labour and process costs? And I think probably the questioner is asking about how to Excel and SIMUL8 link. Did you do that with your model?
We actually have not done that yet because our resources are fairly fungible at this moment, and each team has a staff of only 14. So our goal is to reach 1 million people per year, and when we do that, that type of integration will be critically important to measure not just the productivity, but also the cost standpoint. But we have not done that yet. I know it's possible.
Yeah. So well, that's an amazing goal you've got there, and yes, pleased to say that SIMUL8 will be able to help you with that. So we'll take on that challenge together with the weather.
That sounds good. I appreciate that. Now, if we can just find the money, we'll be all set.
So the next question is, are you going to use the simulation to monitor the current process and look at further improvements? I think you touched on that a little bit. Do you want to say a bit more?
Yes, absolutely. We're a very data-driven organization. Our kind of motto is, if you can't measure it, is it really worth doing? And so one of the things that we've done is we've deployed this. It has been in the field now for 2.5 weeks, and we're going to do a complete review in another 2 weeks and test kind of what we're understanding, look at the variances between what we thought was going to happen, what's actually happening, and then go back to the drawing board and say, okay, how do we continue to tweak and enhance the model? Because one of the things that's nice about what we do is because we track every interaction with our client, because we use biometrics, we know exactly how long each client is in each stage of our process, down to the individual client, down to the individual number of seconds. So we can go back and look at the averages and begin to remodel what we've done. So we'll continue to tweak what we've done. And then as we move forward next year with the whole model of providing medications, we have a whole new challenge in front of us about how to do that, because it's going to be a lot more complicated when we have physicians in call centers and pharmacists in call centers to be able to model how this is going to work to make sure that we provide a high level of customer satisfaction in this process. So that's kind of what we're looking at in the future. Wow,
yeah, thank you. Thanks for that. I do think, as you say, with the biometric data that you've got, that's hugely powerful for people using stimulation, and I think it sounds like there's, I would say there's applicability in lots of different areas where biometric data is available. So that's really interesting.
It's a really simple way of collecting information, because when people show up, they just put down their fingerprint. We don't have to ask them all sorts of information. Our staff do it by second nature. And the big question we had would be, would our clients give us their fingerprints? And, you know, I think the number of people who have refused, you could probably count on both hands and both feet. And we've seen in excess of 400,000 people now. So it's, you know, fingerprints and biometrics works great for data collection.
Yeah, absolutely. So another question now, if you're ready. So this person wanted to know if you're using visual logic in the simulation, and if so, what's the output and what scenarios are you running?
William?
Yeah. We did basically what we were looking at the outputs. We actually were trying to see how much time the people were trying to make sure the software is busy the whole time, or see if somebody was overutilized, underutilized, etc. That was the main outputs we were looking at, as well as the resources. Because what we found is sometimes when we had to increase resources, and based on that, we were able to get the information.
Right. Okay. Thanks very much. That's great. And then somebody also wants to know, to what extent did you use any of the built-in optimization tools? So how much was your experiment intuition, and how much was it using optimization?
So we were fortunate enough to work with one of your great consultants who actually walked through that process with us a number of times. And so we were able to watch and learn. And then as we continue to tweak the software, we continue to use the functionality within the software to further revise and optimize the processes to make sure we have the right resources and the right services at the right time.
Oh, great. Okay. I don't think I've ever had so many questions. It's fantastic on a on a webinar. How was the validation process performed?
In terms of validation, in terms of does the model actually work? Is that the question?
Yeah, I think yes. When you tested the model against real life, that's what yeah. How did you go about that?
So what we do is we monitor each team's performance on a daily basis. We have targets that are daily targets, weekly targets, monthly targets, quarterly targets, and of course annual targets. And we measure and monitor each team's success based on first the number of people that they see in the day. The second is that there is a narrative that goes with that that describes kind of what's happening. We then combine all of the data and look at what should have happened based upon the models to what actually did happen, and then continue to iterate on that process. And mostly what we focus on is quarterly results. And so far I'm very pleased to say that it has been very close in terms of what we thought was going to happen actually is happening.
Oh, okay.
And the biggest variable we have is the weather.
Yes. That's another question somebody's got also, which is about what's the variation as a function of the geographic location? Do you see differences?
We unfortunately have not been able to do that. We had been operating in 4 provinces, and with cutbacks in funding, we're now just operating in 1 province. And so it's a little bit easier for us because it's all within 1 geographic area of South Africa. It's in Ekurhuleni, which is one of the, I think, the 3rd has one of the largest number of people coping with HIV. So we haven't been able to test it on different geographic areas yet. We expect that it would work in exactly the same way because our model is to be like McDonald's.
Yeah, well, that'll be interesting to hear back on. Somebody wants to ask what was the most difficult human behavior to model. That's an interesting one.
Yes. What we have moved away from over the years was originally when we started, we thought that this was an education problem. And so we focused primarily on educating people. And what we've discovered is that by using celebrities and online videos, you can get a 13% knowledge increase within a 12-minute program, which is pretty good when you look at e-learning sides of this. But what we have subsequently concluded, and probably should have known, is that education doesn't necessarily change behavior. And at this point, I have kind of become extraordinarily cynical that people are going to change their behavior about HIV. It's a little bit like people who smoke cigarettes. Everybody who smokes cigarettes knows that that there is a risk of cancer, yet they continue to smoke anyway. And the reason they do is because smoking is fun. When you look at risky sex, sex is fun. So if you live in a poor area, you don't have a job, you don't perceive a future, sex is great fun, great entertainment, and people are not going to change their behavior easily when it comes to having fun. And so the biggest challenge we've had is kind of trying to get behavioral changes in people, and for the most part we've kind of given up on it. primarily because we view HIV as just another chronic disease. And the medication works great, and in the future, what we're hoping to be able to do is identify people who are at most risk and provide them with PrEP, pre-exposure prophylactics, which is using ARVs as a prophylactic against acquiring HIV.
Yeah, I've found the whole thing fascinating. We talk a lot about client-centered approaches, and you've been able to apply simulation to making this really, really efficient. Do you think you would be able to transfer that same approach to other, perhaps harder to reach groups in the same way who have other conditions?
That's a really good question, and one of the things that we have discovered is that the culture of Shout It Now is very different than other non-profit NGO types. And when we have worked with other NGOs and tried to provide them with the processes that we use and kind of a data model that we adopt, it has not been terribly successful. Because anyone who has spent time in the IT world knows that the software is actually easy to create. It is implementing change management that is the difficult part, and that's all a function of cultures. So we would like to be able to provide these services and to government clinics and to other NGOs, and probably wind up private labeling them. But to give people the processes is a hard thing to do at this point. And so we're not sure how we can actually integrate our approach for other at-risk populations.
Yeah, interesting. Thank you. Can you say something about how you secure the client data? Are you worried that it might be accessed by government or insurance companies?
I can, and William, if I get this wrong, please speak up. So the first thing that we do is we look at the fingerprints, and we do not keep the actual image of the fingerprint. We take the image, create a vector out of it using our a proprietary approach to this. So, and then we throw away the images, and we don't keep them. So anyone who wants to use our fingerprint database, it's kind of useless. I suppose you could reverse engineer it, but not easily. And we keep the fingerprint data separate from the individual data, and then we keep that data separate from the HIV status information, and everything is encoded. So we keep things separated by firewalls and with a fair amount of security and encryption along the way, because we recognize that client data needs to be kept confidential.
Right. Okay, that's really interesting. I'm going to ask one more question now. Just to say to everybody, thank you so much for keeping your questions coming in. I don't think we're going to get to all of them, but Bruce, if you don't mind, if we could send you some of the ones we haven't been able to answer, and perhaps you could give a thought. We don't want to. I know people can't stay perhaps longer than the allocated time. So the last question I wanted to ask is, can you give an example of when the output from the simulation model helped a business decision? So, for example, when you had a solution you wanted to implement, and which decision you made, and what area that was in.
There's so many of them that it would be hard to kind of pick one area that is specifically there. I know one of the things that became readily apparent to us was the queues and bottlenecks that we were seeing, because we need to provide a high level of customer service to our clients, and keeping them waiting in queues is not a way to win their hearts and minds, especially at the beginning of the process. And one of the things that we recognized was that there was a backlog at certain parts of the day when we were doing recruiting, and that backlog was around registration. So one of the processes we looked at was to say, let's add an extra station that we can use for registering people to deal with the queues, but it only happens certain parts of the day. So in that case, we looked at the data, looked at the queues, and said, let's invest in additional equipment, even though we don't use it all the time.
Right. That's really helpful. Bruce and William, thank you so much for sharing with us your experience. I've found it totally inspirational, and I'm sure other people have as well. And thank you to everybody who's been listening to this. We've also got a case study that's been put together about the work, so we'll send that out to you with the recording. So everybody who's joined the webinar will get that. So I just really want to say thank you very much indeed to both of you for your time and the inspirational talk. And we look forward to hearing how you get your 1 million clients.
Thank you very much, and thank you for all the help and assistance. It just has made a tremendous difference in our business, and I'm really appreciative.
It's been totally our pleasure. Thanks.
Thank you. Have a good day or good evening, depending on where you